Hello and welcome to our Living with Invisible Disabilities interview series. So glad you joined us today. Jeannie is here today and she's going to share with us about what it's like to live with bipolar disorder. But first, because there's so much more to Jeannie than bipolar disorder, we want to do a little bit of a get to know you, and I'll just ask you some simple either or questions and just first thing you think of.
Okay.
Okay, so radio silence or rocking it out in the car?
Rocking it out. I love classic rock. Love it.
That's awesome. Who was your favorite singer or band?
Probably Tom Petty.
Okay, Tom Petty fans, there you go. So audiobook or paper book?
Oh, I love to read. With kids, I've really picked up audiobooks, so I probably do that more than anything these days.
I love that that is an option. So there's so many different ways to get so much great material these days. Okay, so pizza or salad?
Probably pizza.
I was going to say no judgment here. The pizza sounds great to me. So do pineapples belong on pizza or not?
No.
It's just not right.
Don't. Yeah, it's just not right. Too much sweetness.
Okay, well, we know a little bit about Jenny. I mean, that tells us your whole life story, right? But what we're here today is for Jenny to give us a little bit of insight about bipolar disorder. And I'm especially glad to have Jenny on today because this is a topic not a lot of people like to get personal about. So we want to start at the very beginning because many of our viewers may not know exactly what bipolar disorder is or have an inaccurate definition. So in your own words, Jenny, how would you describe bipolar disorder to our audience?
Yeah, so there's two main phases of mania and depression, but really it's the inability to control your behavior or your thoughts. The thing that is about bipolar disorder is we kind of have an image in our mind, but it can look pretty different from person to person, and there's a lot of things in between. So there's mania, there's depression, there's in between, there's mixed episodes, hypomania. Those are some, terms, but it can look pretty different. And so that's interesting. You could put several people with bipolar disorder in a room and they each have a different story.
When you first had a name for what you were dealing with, what did that moment look like, and what assumptions were already in your mind, and how did those play out when you got a name for what was going on with you?
Yeah, so the first thing was probably shock. Because it is a serious illness. And so I was a little taken aback, but at the same time, I was so sick at that point, and I was really in a desperate situation that I actually felt a lot of relief too, to have a name for the illness, to have a name for what I was experiencing, and that there was an answer, because there was a lot of confusion that was going on in my life at the time. And to have that as an answer was really like a point of solidifying and getting myself grounded.
What would you say was the major disruption before you started receiving treatment? What was the one thing that was causing the most major disruption in your life?
Yeah, so with bipolar disorder, it's fairly common to have a manic episode followed by a pretty big drop into depression. So at that time, I was not sleeping through the night. I could go several nights without sleeping, and not in a great, like, pulling an all-nighter kind of way. It was very disconcerting. And then having racing thoughts, and then really just plummeting into a deep depression of just feeling very worthless, feeling very helpless. And realizing that it was interfering with my life. I mean, I ultimately, through that period of my life, ended up losing my job. And so it was to the point where it was affecting every area of my life.
So coming to the point, once you have a name for something, then you can move forward with a treatment plan.
Yes.
Was that more an instant day and night once you started receiving treatment, or was this like a gradual improvement that you were able to see only in hindsight?
Yeah, definitely gradual. Starting on medications is definitely a good starting point. But it was a long journey getting out of that first depressive episode where I started without any medication at all, without any kind of therapy, and then starting from scratch and moving forward. That time took over a year to get out of that. So, and it's since then, it's been a journey. You know, there's highs, there's lows, but there's not an instant fix, and it's something that you just keep figuring out as you go.
What would you say to that person that's at the beginning of this journey? They now have a name for what they're experiencing, but they aren't far enough down the road to be able to look back and see where they've come, and maybe they're not seeing the progress forward. What would you say to them?
I would say that it's okay to give yourself grace, and that it is a process and it is something that can take time, but just not to give up, never to give up on yourself, and to find people who can lift you up, to support you, find important people in your life. I would definitely highlight that is just vital.
That's great. I think that's something that we can all take to heart, is to give ourselves a little grace that life can be hard sometimes, but we just recognize that it is a journey, and we're just in one place on that journey. So you mentioned that support system is important. What was the support system for you?
So I was in a unique situation where in college I had worked with my counseling center, and I happened to know a couple who had come to speak, who work with NAMI, and that's the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And I was in a place where I knew I needed to get help. And I remembered them and I reached out to them and I was like, I think I'm in serious trouble. I think I need some help. And I remember them coming over to my apartment and saying, you need to come home with us. You're not in a safe environment right now. And I really didn't have family who was in an understanding point at that point. And so I went home with them, and I ended up being hospitalized through that. And that's how I ended up being diagnosed. But that support network of them, and then I was dating my now husband. And, you know, at that time, it was a little bit like, what's going on? But he ended up being the greatest support that I could ask for. And he walked me through the entire process, really just staying in that lane of, I'm going to hold your hand through this. And so that support network was absolutely amazing in my story.
That is another common thread that I hear through these interviews, is that self-advocacy. You had to seek someone out. It wasn't that someone came to you and said, you need help and I'm here to help you. You had to go and recognize that you needed help and seek that out. Would you say that was vital to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that self-awareness is one of those things that you develop, because with bipolar disorder, you're not always aware of your actions and thoughts. To you, you're living your life and everything just seems sort of normal. It might be a little chaotic, but hey, everyone's life is chaotic. Sometimes it does take a person outside yourself to say, you're behaving a little abnormally or things like that. But with me, my life was unraveling with my job loss and things like that. It was to the point where it was quite obvious that there was just an unraveling there that wasn't going to fit into a normal box.
So for that person that's outside looking in, and they believe that they are seeing something in a loved one that needs to be addressed, how would you recommend them to approach that person? And let's back up. Actually, what are some signs that may be of a warning to those from the outside for someone who doesn't have the self-awareness that you have?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is my sleep was very erratic. It was not normal. The racing thoughts, the depression that keeps going. It lasts longer than 2 weeks, and it's just continually getting worse. And I think just even little things like speaking really quickly, or I tend to I don't know, like when I'm sitting down, I like shake my legs to the point where like my whole body is vibrating, and just a lot of displaced energy.
And that's a good way of explaining it. So back to my first question, how would you suggest that someone that sees that and someone they care about, that they approach that person?
I know it can be a gentle process. Um, I think I think if I was to give any kind of advice, it would be to be gentle about it and to try and get that person outside help. I think one thing that I had to work with my husband as a balance is to recognize that he's not my therapist. He is not my counselor. So with a loved one, if you're a parent or if you're a friend or if you're a sister or brother or a husband or wife, I think that you have to somehow figure out how to get that person outside help, because there's only so much you can do as an individual. I think that would be probably my number one.
That's great. So love them, but don't try to doctor them.
Absolutely. And that love and holding their hand, and saying, I'm going to walk with you beside this is paramount.
So, but here you are now. So what does it look like now that you've had some time, you've been on a plan? What does it look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I have to do the things that we all do, like wake up, take a shower and things, but I have to be pretty intentional about it. My natural tendency is not to have a schedule or a rhythm, and to be able to say, I'm going to go to sleep at this time of night. I'm going to turn off screens by 9. I'm going to be in bed at 9:30 or something like that. Those are things that do not come naturally to me at all, but they are so important with stability and being able to make sure that I'm taking care of myself. And I think just having something that takes you out of yourself, taking care of something. I take care of my kids, but it could be, taking care of a dog or a cat. Like there's just something about, when you don't feel like doing something, having a person or an animal or something that requires your love and attention to really get you kind of moving outside of yourself. There's things like that. I mean, I don't drink alcohol. I don't even drink caffeine because I know how it affects me personally. So there's a lot of things that, I just take and move it to be very intentional so that and this is a process. So it took me years to be able to figure out, what, I don't function well on caffeine. So why don't I try just taking that out of my life, taking the daily coffee out or whatever. So it's definitely a process, but being intentional about those rhythms and structure is so helpful.
So the people in your inner circle know, the whole world doesn't have to know what you deal with on a daily basis. It is an invisible disability. So to the outside world, they would not know the struggles that you go through to maintain your health. But when someone does come into your circle enough that they learn that you deal with bipolar disorder, what are some of the misconceptions that immediately come into play that you would like to dispel for our audience?
I think the number one is just people feel surprised. They're like, you don't look like you have bipolar disorder, just as you're saying, like it's invisible. And I think they're expecting someone who is just, in the biggest severity imaginable. We see movies and TV shows that have people with bipolar disorder being very dangerous, being very harmful, heavy into, substance abuse, which, certainly can happen, but it typically doesn't appear exactly like it does on a TV show. And I think a big thing is people are suddenly concerned, like, oh, you have kids. Like, are you going to be a good mom? Like, can you have like a spouse and things like that? That's a huge misconception of like, you can't, you're going to be a terrible parent or something like that. That's something that I personally deal with.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because just like any number of invisible disabilities mean that you also can't take care of a family, right? So
Yes.
we talked about when a a loved one has a concern for someone and how they should address coming to them and letting them know that they need help. About someone that wants to support that person now that they're on the road to recovery, to living their daily best life. How do they support you then?
I think looking for any kind of warning signs, like some of the symptoms that I mentioned before, I think that just being a constant presence, checking in and just saying, hey, even more than a how are you? Because it's easy to be like, I'm fine, but to be enough of an intimate person in that their life to where you can say, no, like, how are you really doing? And I would say, like I said, it is important to have that boundary of that person not being a therapist or a counselor, but there is just being a listening ear. I think that that's really important, and that doesn't cross any kind of line. Just being that person that someone feels free to be able to talk to you, even about intimate things that they're experiencing, because it is vulnerable to open up about some of these dark things that you might be having thoughts or things like that.
Well, you do have a beautiful family, a wonderful relationship with your husband and your children. And so what word of hope would you like to leave with someone who may be at the beginning of this and not be able to see that journey to where you are now? What word of hope would you want to leave with them?
Yeah, I would just say we live in a day and age where there are so many resources available. And that's a beautiful thing that we live in the modern time that we do, because I mean, medications alone, there's not just one or two, there's so many different ones. If something's not working for you, you can change it. You can figure out what's going to work for you. The same with therapy. There are so many options, and it's slowly but surely becoming more accessible to everyone, which is, again, a beautiful thing. Finding a therapist that you have to work out insurance and stuff, but being able to find someone that you really connect with, who you can really open up and share with, still important. And those are, even if it takes some time, those are things that I would say there's hope that you can find. There is going to be someone that you will be able to connect with. There is going to be a medication that you can work with that will really help you to live fully and how you want to live. And I would just say a word of hope is to know that you can do hard things. We have to be intentional, and that it is possible to live a healthy life, however that looks for each person. But if you have goals, if you have ambitions, you can reach them.
That is great. That is a wonderful word to leave with everyone. Again, I want to thank you for coming on and dispelling some of those misconceptions and assumptions around bipolar disorder and helping those that may be starting on this journey to see that there is hope. So thank you again for that, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you.
And for anyone else who'd like to learn more about Joshua's Voice and our Invisible Disabilities interview series, you can find us at joshuasvoice.org and in this social contact information below. Thank you for joining us today, and go be the best you.